Hi, my name is Rich Schmidt. I'm here with Hal Medici. We're at his home in Newburgh. It's April 16th, 2019. Thanks for joining us today, Hal. We appreciate it. Let's start by asking you, why grapes? What made you get into wine grapes?
Well, first of all, that's really a very interesting question. But before I will answer that question with starting from a different point.
Okay.
Okay? Okay, I was a teacher at the community college level for 30 years, and my discipline was mathematics. I was at the University of Kansas in 1960 trying to continue my degree program, working towards a PhD. And I was married, and I had 4 children, and I had the most patient wife one could ever expect. And I had a scholarship to continue at the university, and my wife said, "Hal, get with it. We've got 4 kids. We should go back to our normal lifestyle." So I got the message loud and clear, and we came back to Oregon. And this is in 1960. And at that time, I was 30 years old. I was really a very old student. And both my wife and I, at that time, decided that we'd like to live in the country. Mm-hmm. And so we found this property right here that we own right now, and we bought it in 1965. And at that time, it was 40 acres with 20 acres of filberts on it. And we were still living in Portland. And I was communicating back and forth on weekends and so on and so forth, you know, trying to be an amateur farmer, which we did quite well. And later on, my wife and I decided that why don't we try to buy a piece of property that had a home on it, mm-hmm. out in the country. The motivation was to have a place for our children to live in the country rather than in the city space. Mm-hmm. So we came out here to Newburgh, and I came out to Newburgh, and we found a piece of property that both of us wanted, and it was 200 acres. And those 200 acres had approximately 80 acres of fruit on it. There were Bartlett pears, Royal Land cherries, and Italian plums. And we bought that farm, and we moved there in 1969, and we lived there. And my wife and I worked in Portland, and my wife worked in Portland. She worked at she was a medical secretary at the Providence Hospital. And she says, "Hal, why don't we move to the other farm?" We both, at that stage of the game, we owned both farms, this farm and the other farm. And she says, because it's so far to drive from the other farm. The other farm was closer to Carlton, and it's the farm that was purchased by Laurel Ridge. Laurel Ridge, they finally ended up with that property. But anyway, so we moved back to our first farm, which was the Filbert farm, and we built our home here, and we built wineries, and I consider myself to be a an amateur architect, and so I did everything. I designed all the buildings, and I did all the architecture, and I even did all the engineering, and hence all the buildings here are the result of that effort. Now, the beginning question is, how did we ever get to wine grapes? Dick Ponzi and I taught together. He was in the engineering department, and I was in the math department at PCC. We became very good friends, and he came out to the farm, to our property, and he told my wife along with me, that we had, by his standards, we had a very good property to put grapes on. The reason being, the elevation was between 500 and 800 feet. It's all a southern exposure, and cool nights, and et cetera, and et cetera. And so anyway, in the conversation, I asked my wife, "What do you think? Do you think it would be a good? Would you like to put grape?" She says, "We ought to do it because it'll look good." A little comedy, right? But that's an actual fact. So anyway, that's how it started. We took all the filberts out and we put in grapes. We bought all the plants from Dick Erath. It was all the first were Pommard. Everything was Pommard, and we put in also Riesling. We bought both Riesling and Pommard from Dick Erath. And our first planting was in 1976. However, prior to that time, the first 1 acre planting was in 1973. And all those little plants I got from Dick Ponzi, he had a bunch of little plants, and we bought them. We didn't buy them, he gave them to us, and we planted. That was our first vineyard. And then what happened is, after that, we continued to put more and more grapes in, and at present we have 25 acres of grapes, approximately 23 acres of Pinot Noir, and 2 or 3 acres of Riesling. And the elevation of the farm goes anywhere from 550 to 850. Okay, along with grapes, my wife and I, whose name was Dottie, we loved to travel, and we've been to Europe 3 or 4 times. And one year, it was, probably in the early 80s, we were in Provence, in France, and we were traveling at the time. And we went through the Provence area where they do a lot of lavender. And my wife saw these beautiful lavender fields, and she said to me, "Hal, God, we ought to plant some lavender." Well, anyway, I said, okay. When we got back, I said, we'll put in lavender. And so we put in 5 acres of lavender, and it's up on the hill here. And I said, I'm going to put in the lavender for you, and I'm going to put in a building that we saw, a type building that we saw in France that must have been a respite for the workers and that kind of thing. And so we put in 5 acres of lavender, and we put in a lavender building. And you should really get up there to see it.
Definitely. Because
it's mortise and tenon. Do you know what mortise and tenon is? Well, that goes way back to at least the middle of the 1800s, where prior to a lot of metal fasteners, they used to put put timbers together and then put a wooden stake between the timbers. That's called mortise and tenon. So anyway, that's a little side story. And that little side story, I think, kind of demonstrates where both my wife and I were going in terms of our intention. Mm-hmm. Our intention was our major intention is what we both call lifestyle. It wasn't necessarily whether it had to be grapes or whatever. Mm-hmm. It was lifestyle. We wanted to be out in the country. I did not consider myself to be what you would call a very involved person in terms of the farm. I hired everything out. I hired all the vineyard people to do all their work, and as a matter of fact, all of the winery production was always done by others. Mm-hmm. I do not know how to make wine. All I know is that I wanted to be out in the country to enjoy what I have described.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And if I have a contribution at all to the wine industry, which I believe is certainly minimal, it's not maximum, it's been giving the opportunity for several wineries to start their winery. Mm-hmm. There's been at least 15 wineries started in this winery. Some of the big names have been Peter Rosbach and Chenin, mm-hmm. Owen Rowe, Etfili. So I could go on and on and on. There's at least 50, mm-hmm. 15. And if I were to think that I had any contribution at all, it would be certainly that I created that which gave the opportunity for others to start.
Sure.
Now, I love wine, and I love especially a good Pinot Noir. And we have, over the years, made some quite good wines. But that really was not my intention. I.e., the intention was not to make money from the farm. The intention was to have the farm support itself. Mm-hmm. And that supporting the farm supporting itself created the lifestyle that we enjoyed, and we enjoyed it for several years.
Sure.
So that's kind of my stick right there. Do you have any other questions?
I do. So when you say that these wineries got their start here,
yeah.
Give me kind of an example. They were using your space to create their early wines?
Yes, that's correct.
And were they using your grapes as well?
Eric Hammaker, mm-hmm. who is Dick Ponzi's son, became Dick Ponzi's son-in-law. Mm-hmm. He suggested that I should make wine. Mm-hmm. And so I got all the credentials to do that. And we started making wine in 1995. I mean, 1995. And so he made my wines, and then after he went to his own winery, Peter Rosbach made my wines for 15 years. And but right now we have 6 different renters in the winery, and they're small wineries, mm-hmm. and I'm not making any wine now, simply because I'm taking a little transition here now. I'm trying to prepare myself for another back to square one. Okay. We are trying to develop a foundation, and that is our next attempt to do what we would like to do. We had 2 grandchildren, one who died from one of these child diseases, and the other one who still is alive but who has it's been very difficult. And both my wife and I, by the way, my wife passed away about 6 months ago, but I still say both my wife and I, our intention was to start a foundation, and we want to connect with St. Jude's Hospital, and we would like to start a foundation. The concept, hopefully, would be to have what we call what we did call I'm trying to think of the name now, a theme bar. Yeah, the question is, what does that mean? The theme bar means that, well, first of all, both my wife and I were big into opera and symphony, classical music. And the theme bar means that we would like to have amateur people come in and demonstrate their skills in the sense of singing and even fine arts. And we would like to have one night of political discussion, and the concept would be to combine the wine bar with the usual wine bar with tapas type cuisine. Emphasis on a gathering and hopefully learning rather than on either food or wine. And it would be non-profit, and all the profit would go to the St. Jude Hospital. So that is our intention, and we're working on it right now, and hopefully we'll be able to accomplish that.
Sure. It's a noble cause. A very noble cause.
Well, you could call it that. It's the lifestyle that we want to continue. And so hopefully that'll happen, and that's where I'm going now.
Sure. So when you meet Dick Ponzi, you become friends. Dick comes and sees your property, and he says you should plant grapes.
Right.
And you decide to do it. What's your next step? Did you actually do the planting yourself? You said you hired.
Well, yeah, okay, that's a good question.
Sure.
The answer is that that is a good question. Well, first of all, we bought the plants from Erath, and we laid out. By the way, this was all done by me and our friends. We didn't have at that time any knowledge of Hispanics as an example. And Dick Ponzi and his children and students of mine and my wife and my children planted the 6 acres of Pinot Noir and Riesling. We all did together. And that's the way that was the first start.
That's awesome.
We didn't have a crew. We just had friends, and I had some of my bigger students who were capable. And of course, we paid them, and I give them all A's, of course. And that's the way that happened.
Sure.
Right. That was a good question. I appreciate that one.
So then once your vines start to mature and you start to have grapes on them, who were some of the early people who bought them from you?
Well, let's see. Oh, yeah, Ponzi bought some of them. And We sold them to a lot of small vineyards whose names right now I can't remember, but we did 3 years. Obviously, after 3 years, you start getting a crop. However, that was in 1976, you see, and then we started using my own grapes in the early 40s for my own wines. Yeah.
And so what made you decide to, you said that Eric Homaker talked you into making wine, so
Yeah.
what made you decide to actually do it?
Well, I just thought it was a good idea. Yeah, see, that was never built into my intention to do that thing, because it was just to grow the grapes, or just to simply have a farm crop, period. But he said, why don't you do it? And so both my wife and I said, well, why don't we do it? There's a little side to this story. A lot of young people, and to say I wasn't what you call real young, we were in our 30s, but a lot of young people fight a real, have probably a great deal of pressure economically, but we didn't. What we did was, in terms of the economy, what we did was within our capability, without expecting some kind of revenue from either the wine or the grapes. So we had that advantage, and young people quite often don't have that advantage, and hopefully that doesn't discourage them. Let's put it that way.
Sure. Did you feel that your vineyard had a certain characteristic? How would you describe the grapes coming out of your vines?
Well, at one time I thought that our grapes had what I called the Pinot Noir had a beautiful, to my palate anyway, what I call pencil cedar. Now the question is, what does that mean? Well, I don't know. Young people today probably don't know what pencil cedar is, but I did, because when I was a young kid, being a Catholic, right, and being in the parochial school, I used to chew on my pencils a lot. And I said I can remember the taste of pencil cedar. And so I bring that up because at parochial school, you have to be right on spot and so forth. But anyway, at one time, and of course, it could very well have been a combination of the skills that Peter Rosbach had and the quality of the Pinot Noir that was coming. And I thought it was unusually, had a very, let's say, delicate flavor, taste to the palate without it being overbearing. And to me, that's the subtlety, I think, of a beautiful wine. It's one that doesn't hit you on the head with a hammer, but has a tendency to blend into the beautiful experiences that you're getting from the drink. So that's okay.
Did you have an interest in wine before you planted your vineyard?
That's a very okay. Now that's a very interesting question. My dad, of course, I'm Italian. And my dad was an immigrant, came here when he was 16 years old to the United States, and on and on and on. And he used to make his own wine, okay? And every year, there's a little bit of history behind this, by the way, that he, along with many of his Italian friends, used to buy wines that came from Eastern Oregon. They were the varietals that typically were made there. I think Zinfandel was probably one of them. And so they used to jointly, there were 4 or 5 of his friends would have a truck, certainly not a large truck, but a truck of wine, grapes that would come from Eastern Oregon, and they would each get their share, and my dad made his wine every year. Quantity-wise, I don't know, but he had a press where he had a press in the basement of our house, and he'd make his own wines, and he used to have a little wine cellar with barrels in it. Okay, and at the time I was a student at the University of Portland. That's where I got my bachelor's degree. And a very good friend of mine who loved to drink became a very good friend of mine. And so he knew that we talked about my dad making wine. And so he and we used to sneak into my dad's wine cellar, and we'd open the spigot and take our wines, and we drink the worst wine you could possibly drink, but we got the glow that we both wanted. And so that's my experience with wine drinking. Say what you will.
And then you got to drink some really good Oregon Pinot Noirs, and you got to see the good.
Yeah, you're right. But that was the beginning of my wine drinking.
So you entered into the industry in the mid 1970s when there really wasn't much of an industry to speak of.
Yes, the answer is yes. By the way, a little side story.
Sure.
In about 1960, I think about 1969, I was teaching again at PCC, and I was at my office doing some office work, and in walks this person wanting to sell books, math books from Scott Forsman, which was common for that to happen. And so anyway, we got to talking, and as to what he was here for, well, it turned out to be that he was David Lett, who started Irie. And he was selling books at the time for Scott Forsman. And so I always thought that was kind of an interesting coincidence that David Lett, and he told me, we got into a conversation, because at that time we had the Filbert Orchard, and so we talked about being in the farm and on and on. And he said to me, he says, well, I'm up here from UC Davis, and it's my intention to start a winery. And so that was David Lett. That's a little vignette from that little interesting passing.
An amazing coincidence.
Yeah, it was, right. Right.
So tell me about the industry as you got into it. You're not a lot of people, obviously, just getting started. So what were the people like? What were the customers like? What were the winemakers like? Okay,
well, I think that's a very appropriate question. I love intellectual, ethical people, and I put the emphasis on ethics. And in my opinion, I have many, that has truly been kind of the individuals that I have come across with in my wine industry experiences. We had a wine bar in downtown Newburgh, which was called the Dark Horse. Our kids decided to give it that name. It's questionable how good that was, but we called it the Dark Horse. And I own a building in downtown Newburgh, and we had that wine bar there for probably 10 years. And so quite often I never served the wine, but almost daily I would be there simply to talk to the people who worked there, and I came across a tremendous number of just extremely gentle, very congenial people. So, that's kind of my feeling with regard to that question.
And it felt like that continued as the industry was growing?
Yes. Yeah, the answer is yes.
What about now as you look back? Does it still feel like it's a small community kind of industry, or does it feel like it's gotten a bit bigger than that?
Well, I'd have to think a moment on that. We used to have a lot of events here, by the way, and they were great events. And that's when Peter Rosbach was here. Peter Rosbach had a big job because of both his product and his personality, I guess. But he's been gone about 10 years, and so I don't have that much connection with the wine industry today, other than I meet with Dick Ponzi once in a while and Erath once in a while, and other than that, there's not much going on in my life with regard to the wine industry.
Okay.
I'm going in other directions now.
Sure.
I'm going to be 90 next October, and so it's about time for me to start making the three-point landing. And so I'm trying to do some other things. Sure.
You mentioned that we talked earlier about how your winery was the start for a lot of brands using your space.
Yes.
What about other people in the industry that you may have mentored or worked with over the years? Anybody special that comes to mind?
Well, there's been some amateurs who would ask me questions, and I've told them how to do various things, and one put in 2 acres, and he still communicates with me, and all he has is 2 acres, and he's always been so grateful for me to at least describe how he might start. And of course what he did was he just simply took cuttings, and I told him what to do and put them in the ground, and so on and so forth. Yeah. In fact, 3 acres of this property were the result of just simply taking cuttings from the property and putting them into the ground. And we have some very beautiful plants as a result of that procedure, rather than root plantings.
Sure.
Just cuttings only. In fact, everything above this area, those were all just sticks.
Sure. When people approach you for advice, what did you usually tell them? What was like the first piece of advice or biggest piece of advice?
Okay, now that probably is probably the most best directed question. My advice: create a lifestyle. That was my advice. And hopefully make sure that it's affordable. Okay?
Sure.
And that truly is what I told, especially young people. Young people are attracted typically to older folks. And so anyway, that's my advice right there.
Sure.
Of course, it was easy for me to say because economically, you see, we were very, very comfortable.
Sure.
But it was lifestyle and lifestyle was always the intention right from day one. If my beautiful wife was here, she'd be nodding over there, and because that truly was our intention.
Sure. So you talk about not being quite as connected to the industry now as you were, but what do you see a future for Oregon wine? What do you see something good or bad on the horizon, or hopes and dreams on the horizon?
Well, okay, I'd say that's another interesting question. Hopefully, I can answer it. But it's not only the wine industry, but it's, to me, one of the greatest cultural evolutions, hopefully you understand what I mean by that, how culture evolved, was what I call the evolution of the economy. Now, why do I think of that as being one of the greatest? It's because it's one of the greatest ways for human beings to connect, because the economy basically creates a dependence on each other. Now, if I would give advice to the wine industry, it would be to create an industry where you promote ethics and good behavior, and still make a profit that you could share with yourself and others. That would be the way I would express that. But that goes beyond the wine industry. I would love that's kind of my philosophy for any kind of economic involvement.
Sure.
Yeah. So. Ask me more questions. Maybe I can talk. Maybe I'm thinking that I could learn something from this.
Well, let's see. I'm kind of running out of my questions here, but I can come up with something here.
Well, okay.
Let's talk about maybe favorite memories from interacting with the wine industry. Any particular moments? You talked about events here at the vineyard. Any particular that stand out in your head?
Let's see. I don't know that there's been anything unusual, but I've had some very beautiful happenings, and I don't remember them in particular. But I've been around a lot of nice, decent people, and hopefully they enjoyed the property. The people love to come to this property.
I can see why.
And we have a very beautiful view. There's several advantages, and I love people coming here simply to enjoy the property. My wife's rose garden, our rose garden has got 400 roses in it, and it's right here. And when the roses are in bloom, people will come here and they'll love the roses, and they also the lavender. And I mentioned the lavender. We've never ever sold the lavender. The lavender is for people to come here and walk through it, enjoy the view of the valley, which is tremendous from the lavender, to enjoy the fragrance and pick all the lavender they want without having any kind of a payment, nothing like that. And we encourage causes to come on the property and to pick the lavender, and any kind of monetary outcome would go towards the cause. So the lavender was never put there for a commercial reason. The lavender was put there for a beauty. And a lot of people have told us how they love to see the lavender from the from the valley, because you're not familiar with it. You come back in July and you'll see it's a beautiful, beautiful blue area, 5 acres. It really shows up because of the color.
Sure.
And so, you know, so I think the question was, I love people coming here and enjoying themselves.
This seems to be, when you talk about lifestyle, it seems to be a big part of what you're talking about is kind of giving to a community. That
Yeah, exactly, right.
Sure.
Right.
So when you came here, of course, you were probably one of the first to plant in the area, and now you've seen some.
I think I was the first on this side of the mountain.
And now you've seen some growth around.
That is correct.
So talk about kind of your neighbors and the growth, watching the growth of vineyards around you.
Well, I think it's great that that I'm sure I'm sure that they could have been here long before without me being here, but I'm sure that I was probably somewhat of an influence. And we have a lot of people here we have 40 acres on the hill here, and of course. I have quite a few real estate people contact me thinking that, you know, it's time for you to make a 3-point landing, you may want to sell. And the last thing in the world, this property will never be sold, and my children know that. This will always be a legacy. And the last thing I want is this property to be cut up and put into homes. I want it to continue to be to be what it is. We have 5 acres of timber up above us, and that also will never be cut, and that's part of the property also.
Sure.
Yeah.
So as people have moved in around you, have they come to you for advice as well? Are those some of the people that we're talking about?
No.
No, not really?
Not really, no. No. Yeah, no, the answer is no.
Okay.
I hate to say that. There must be a reason for them not wanting to ask me.
They're just admiring from afar, I'm sure.
Oh, okay, sure.
Anything else from you guys? Okay. Those are the questions we have. We appreciate your time. Is there anything else that you'd like to talk about here? We have a.
No, I think it's pretty much. Are you thinking that there's anything that I might add?
I think you covered everything I was hoping you would, and we really appreciate your time and your thoughts.
I'm happy to do it.
So thank you so much. We'll go ahead and end our taping here, and.